Hi, this is Mike, WB4HUC, and I just wanted to provide an update regarding the software that I talked about last week that I wanted to write to show the status of different parameters in my Elecraft KPA500 amplifier. And I talked about the language I was writing it in, which is BBC Basic, and I talked about how Basic is an interpreted language, but with this version of Basic and the IDE that they give you to develop the code in, you can create an executable module. So if you want to pass the thing around, give the program to someone else, you can just create the executable and it's a little standalone file that you can run. You don't need anything else. So it's pretty low overhead, and I have made significant progress. In fact, the program, as far as I'm concerned, is just about done. I may tweak it, I may add things to it, take things from it, but basically it's done. So I did create an executable version, and I did put an icon on my desktop. I just call it the KPA500 status reporter. And if I double click this, it will bring up a small window, and you can resize this window. You can specify the size in the code, which I did, but if you need to, you can move it around and resize it after you start it. So that's what we've done here. There we go. So you specify, when you start the thing, you specify two parameters. One is the COM port number that the amp is connected to, and for me that's number 5, COM port 5. And then you specify the serial port communication rate, which for me is 38400. And there you go. So these are the parameters that I'm demonstrating, or that I'm displaying, I should say, in the software. The serial number, the firmware version, the operating temperature, the operating status, whether you're an operator standby, and if I push the operate standby button on the amp, you'll see that change, and you'll see it show up over here in the radio display. The band that we're on, and if I change the band, I can change the band using the button on the front of the amp, or I can go here into the radio and I can change the band. Either way you do it, it'll show up both in the radio and the amplifier. Here's the PA voltage and current, which will change under key down conditions, of course. Voltage goes down a little bit, current will go up. Radio interface, there's several selections. You set this in the amplifier. I have a K4. There is no K4 selection in this version of the firmware for the amp, so I chose K3 and that works fine. The PC port data rate's 38400, which is what you saw me type in after the program started. The transceiver port data rate's 4800, and then the fault code. Right now there's no faults. Now if you have a KPA 500, you know that if something causes a fault, the red light on the amplifier will come on. There will be a tone emitted from the little built-in speaker in the amplifier, and you'll see something in the amplifier LCD display to tell you what the fault is. So we're going to see if we can cause a fault right now, one that the tuner, I have a KAT500 tuner here, and I'll just mention briefly. So for the amplifier keying line, it goes from the radio to the tuner and then to the amplifier. That way, when the tuner sees something it doesn't like, it can interrupt this keying line and the amplifier will stop transmitting. So a high SWR condition is probably the most common, and it will interrupt the key line, and of course if the amplifier faults, it'll stop transmitting. So I believe we can cause both here without, if I don't get carried away with it, it shouldn't hurt anything. And then the RF connection, the coax, goes from radio to the amplifier to the tuner, because you want the tuner to be part of the antenna system, right? So if you were to put a SWR and watt meter in line here, you'd put it right here between the amplifier and the tuner. and that way the meter will see whatever changes are made by the tuner to lower the SWR. But those are the connections, and those are how they work, and that's how I have it. So let's see if we can generate this fault. So what I'm going to do, the amplifier is in operate mode, and we are connected to the antenna. So we're putting out about 40 watts. Here's the SWR. And you can see over here it's very low. So how do we do this? Well, I have 3 positions on the tuner, and I'm going to move the antenna on the tuner to position 2, which has no antenna. So it's practically just an open connector. And when I push the code key, that should cause 2 things. It should cause the amplifier keying line to be interrupted, and it should cause a fault in the amp. There we go. We hear SWR too high. So the radio tells you, but if you had a different radio that wouldn't tell you, perhaps. I used to use an Omni 7, Tentec Omni 7, as my station transceiver, and of course it wouldn't display that information. But now you see it here. Not only that, there's a tone emitted from the speaker in the amp, which I may have mentioned, and then there's a notice in the LCD display, the amplifier, and the fault light on the amp turns on. So you know you got a fault, but I just thought it would be useful to put it here. So here you see it, excessive reflected power. So to clear the fault, I'm just going to press the operate standby button and put the amp back in operate mode. And now the fault is gone and we're back in operate mode. But we still have the amplifier keying line disabled by the tuner based on what I told you. Go to the radio, go to the tuner, then go to the amp with the keying line. So if I push the button, if I go back to antenna 1, which is, you saw the signals come up, and we're putting out about 2.3 watts. Here we say 2.8 watts. So the amplifier is in operate mode, but he's not doing anything because the key line is interrupted. So as I understand it, there are 2 ways to get the tuner to enable the keying line. One is if you have software that can send a command to the tuner to tell it to enable a keying line. I don't have that. The other is to initiate a tuning cycle, and that will do it. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the tuner in, we're going to put the amplifier in standby mode. We're going to go back to antenna 1, which we've already done. I'm going to hit the low power tune button on the radio, which will put out about 15-20 watts. 14 watts. And now when I put the amplifier back in operate mode, you'll see the power go back down. And now you should see what we had before, 35, 36 watts. So now we're back to where we were. So to me, it's useful to have this information here. And again, like I said before, writing the code was kind of a learning experience. I wanted to learn this particular dialogue of BASIC, and I wanted to learn a little bit of serial port communications. And I've learned some. I haven't learned as much as I probably need to know for various circumstances, but it's been a fun project. And next, I'm going to tackle the tuner. I actually have some code already written to talk to the tuner, but things are a bit flaky. I'm not going to go into any details, but I'm having some problems, and hopefully I'll get those solved. But right now, the amplifier dashboard, I'll call it, is working fine. It's working the way I want it to work, and it's doing what I want it to do. And surprisingly, I'll show you just to show you. So here's the code. I'm not going to go through it, but I did want to show you. Looks like 232 lines of code. We can verify that if we just assign line numbers. We'll say 1, 1. Okay. 233 lines of code. So it's not a very large program at all. Uh, there's some little bit of tricky stuff in it, but as far as if it's a big program, it's really not. So, okay, I think that's about all I have for today. I just wanted to update folks on what I've done here and how I've done it. It seems to be working the way that I want. Um, one of the things I wanted to do, I don't think I did, I didn't really notice. I wanted, when the fault occurs, to print it out in red letters. I don't think it did that. I'll double check. I wasn't paying attention. But if it didn't, I'm going to change it so that it will, and that way it'll hopefully get your attention a little bit more. But if the amplifier squealing at you and the fault light coming on the amplifier and all of that doesn't get your attention, I don't I don't know if red letters on a computer screen will, but I'm going to add that in there just for the fun of it. And we'll, like I said, over time it'll probably change a little bit here and there. But basically it's done, and I'm pretty pleased with how it works. Anyway, I just wanted to provide this little update, so I appreciate you watching. Thank you.